Welcome to the February 2022 Architectural NORR talk. My name is Kevin Cooper. I'm a director of NORR in Glasgow, here in Scotland, and I'm the UK NORR leader. And our guest speaker today will be joining us from, as you can see, from the City of London. A little bit about NORR. It's a continuing education programme founded by NORR 15 years ago. The three main goals are to teach, to learn, and to improve, and to try and do that continuously. The programme relies on bringing the best speakers in three series, the architecture series, the engineering series, and the masters series, all of which are very interesting, and we can learn from the great architects and engineers of the past. Each of the NORR Ed sessions, which were in 2020, have been recorded, and with the guest speaker's permission as well. And all of these are available on the NORR YouTube channel, and I'd thoroughly recommend you go and have a look at them. Today's session will be posted in 1 week's time. And a warm welcome to all of our 14 NORR offices around the world. It's great for everyone to get together. One more slide, please. Thank you. And also welcome to the invited students from 10 schools of architecture, again, all around the world, in Canada, in America, in the UK, and in Rome. And now what I'd like to do is introduce our NORR chair and the founder of NORR Ed, Silvio Baldassarra, who's going to introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, Silvio.
Thank you, Kevin, and welcome to all globally to this NORR Ed. Our guest today is internationally renowned architect whose innovative designs in the past few decades have earned her some of the highest architectural achievements, including the CBE, the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, the RIBA Sterling Prize, the Jane Drew Prize, the Honorary Fellow of the AIA, the Royal Academician Elect. Our guest speaker is Amanda Levete. Amanda is a graduate of the Hammersmith School of Art and the Architectural Association School of Architecture. Amanda worked for 4.5 years at Richard Rogers' practice before joining Jan Kaplicky as a partner at Future System in 1989. It's true that the Lord's Media Center was a very important project at Future System, which was recognized in 1999 with the RIBA Sterling Prize. In 2009, Amanda formed ALA and has developed a distinct office culture and approach to design through the years. The desire to be technically and conceptually inventive makes their buildings incredibly special. What I'm particularly impressed with is the attention to design, solution, and the diversity of each project. No two are alike. With the approach may be one that is consistent, each solution is unique to each of their projects. To quote from ALA's website, their approach to design includes exploration of history, context, circumstances of each project, and research technical possibilities of materials, structures, and production. This is evident in the range of ALA's portfolios. Some of the major ones shown here in my final slide as I introduce Amanda to share her presentation on the title, Architecture Really Matters. I turn it over to Amanda.
Hello, and good morning and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are right now. And thank you, Silvio, and thank you, NORR Ed, for inviting me to speak, because what you've started is a really great initiative to share knowledge, to share experiences with different communities across the airwaves. So I start with this slide because I reckon that everyone has had something of a reset over these last 2 very difficult years. And for sure, we certainly have. After working in an open plan warehouse for more than 20 years, we've moved into a beautiful Georgian townhouse. I mean, the complete polar opposite of a warehouse, where we're really reimagining the office as a family home and working in these rather grand rooms on multiple floors. I mean, it's a huge shift for us. But there's one thing that we've kept from our warehouse days, and that's our no shoes policy. And really, it's this kind of messy pile of shoes that's very emblematic of our culture. And that's a group of very different individuals, but all with a common sense of purpose. And to clients who must also take their shoes off, I think it sends a kind of subliminal message that you are not in for a passive ride. We're all in this together, but it's going to be fun. And I want to just give you a bit of context to ALA, because from 1989 to 2008, I worked in partnership with Jan Kaplicky as Future Systems. And I'm immensely proud of the work that Jan and I did together. And I am very conscious that I would not be where I am today without my time with him. And it's no coincidence that all of my fellow directors at ALA started out in Future Systems. This is a Future Systems project, the media centre at Lord's Cricket Ground, which was completed in 1999. And it really is pure McLuhan, because the building is both the medium and the message. It's the place from where 250 of the world's media file their stories, and then footage of the building itself is broadcast on TV screens around the world during the cricket season. And without knowing it at the time, we had designed the world's first all aluminium building, built by a boat builder, where the ribs and spars and the skin work together as a semi-monocoque structure. But the pressure of working and living together proved too much. And Selfridges in Birmingham was the last building that Jan and I completed together. Selfridges is a privately owned shop into which we invested a huge ambition, and it is now an important part of the city of Birmingham's identity, as well as being a very successful department store. Starting ALA in 2009 in the shadow of Jan's death was extremely hard, and nothing like as simple as changing the name on a slide. And it's taken time to understand who we're becoming as an office. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. But if there's just one thing that really distinguishes ALA from Future Systems, it's that we start not with a sketch, but always with a conversation. And the conversation we had here about Lisbon was, how could we design a building to help reconcile a city that was cut off from its waterfront? This is the Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology in Lisbon. It's on the banks of the River Tagus, from where the great explorers set off. And it is, as you can see, an absolutely amazing site. And you could actually see in the pattern of the water that moment where the river turns into the ocean. What we wanted to do was to capture this very outward-looking characteristic of the city. And yet, Lisbon is cut off from its waterfront by train tracks and a highway. So our first move was to persuade our client, the energy company EDP, that we also needed to design a bridge over the highway to connect the museum back to the city. And we identified a small square on the other side of the train tracks from where we could span over the road without any need for steps and then land on the roof of the museum. And arguably, this simple urban move was actually more important than the architectural ones, because it became the generator for the entire design. We not only made it easy to get to the museum, but we created a new public space on the roof. This is the opening weekend of the museum when 80,000 people, almost 15% of the population of Lisbon, congregated, whether it was on the river, on the roof, or inside the museum. And it is now one of the most visited museums in Portugal, despite not having a collection. And the roof is, if you like, a kind of elevated town square, and it's very much part of the River Walk. It's a destination in itself and a wonderful vantage point to look out across the water. But maybe more importantly, to look back towards the city, giving you a completely different perspective of the city. But perhaps what is most important is what we didn't do. And untypically for an architect, we did not build as high as we could have done, as high as permits would have allowed us to. Perhaps it's counterintuitive, but it meant sinking the exhibition spaces partly below ground and partly below the water table. But by designing a low-slung building, we preserved what was really important, which is the views from the city to the water and from the river back to the city. And this is really a museum for big art. This is the oval space with an installation by the artist Hector Zamora. And from here, you can enter all of the other gallery spaces. And it's where one space blends into the next, because this is a museum where three disciplines come together. And this is a gallery that is animated by natural light with a roof light that's designed to let only north light in, and where you can look up and see the sky and the ceramic tiles on the underside of the shaded overhang. Our focus with this project was really very much about its context and the waterfront, making places to sit close to the water where the steps go down to the river and where you can take the shade from the overhanging roof. The facade of the building is extremely long. So to give it a grain and a human scale, we designed a three-dimensional ceramic tile so that the surfaces pick up the different light conditions and articulate the facade. And we were really inspired by Portugal's very rich tradition of craft and ceramics. But to add a further layer of depth to the 15,000 tiles, we used a crackle glaze, and it's a technique that dates back to the Song dynasty in China, and it was the result of an accident in the kiln. But realizing the delicacy and complexity of this accidental effect, ceramicists in the 13th century devised a way to reproduce it intentionally. We deliberately chose a very neutral color for the glaze, because it's the light in this place that brings the color. And this is what happens at sunset. And it's literally as though the building has caught on fire. And at dusk, it almost looks like pewter. And there's this magic moment at the top of the steps. And I wish I could say we designed it, but I'm going to be honest, we didn't. It was something that, it was an accidental effect, but we know for next time. When you stand under the overhang of the roof, you can literally hear the sound of the waves reflected above you. And there was another unexpected moment that we simply couldn't have imagined, when a group of musicians used the ceramic tiles of the facade as a musical instrument. So moving to my hometown, London, the Victorian Albert Museum. The original way into the museum is a rather grand entrance on Cromwell Road. It's the main traffic artery that runs east-west. But our task was to design a second entrance off Exhibition Road, which runs north-south, as well as a vast space for the museum's headline shows. It was the biggest project for the museum in over 100 years, and very much emblematic of their progressive ethos. And progress in more ways than one. This photograph from 1863 is of the V&A's original architects and engineers. 150 years later, in the exact same space, is a photograph of my team and our engineers. This was the site for the competition that we went on to win, and it was very much a forgotten space in the museum that was used for plant and storage. But before I show you our proposal, it's interesting to remember what could have been, because before our competition, there was another competition on the same site, which Daniel Libeskind won in 1996. But when the design was eventually scrapped in 2004, I remember thinking at the time, you know, this is the end of the era of building as icon. So when we made our proposition in 2011, we took the polar opposite view, and we talked not about building as icon, but about the iconography of public space. Exhibition Road is the home not just of 3 museums, but also Imperial College and the Royal Albert Hall. And the street had been newly pedestrianised, but there was nowhere to stop off the main drag. And we saw a fantastic opportunity here to take the street into the museum and the museum onto the street. But to do this, there was a huge barrier to overcome. The stone screen facing onto Exhibition Road was an important part of the museum's heritage. It was originally designed to hide the boiler rooms, but they had long since gone. So we took a huge risk with our competition proposal. We argued that the key to the success of the new entrance required a radical alteration of the Grade 1 listed screen, as its purpose was no longer to hide, but to reveal. And when we won the competition, we had to make this argument to the planners and the heritage bodies and persuade them that the social imperatives of opening up access in both a literal and metaphorical way actually overrode the conservation arguments. But when we first presented our scheme to them, they simply said no. But what we did, we went away, we reflected, but we did not change our design. What we did change was the way that we argued the case. And in doing that, we learned more about the V&A's history than the heritage bodies did themselves. And in the V&A's archive, we found this drawing. And this is Aston Webb's original competition entry for the site, where you can see that the screen's much lower, much more open, and behind it was a garden. And when I saw this drawing, I knew we had them, because what had happened was during construction of Aston Webb's scheme, they ran out of money, as you know, often happens in construction projects, and the boiler rooms, which were designed to go underground, had to be built above ground to save money, and the screen was at the last minute made solid in order to hide them. Anyway, we won the argument, and the screen is now repurposed as a colonnade. And it was really this urban move that unlocked the potential of the project, creating a new public courtyard that invites you just to drift off the street and then into the new entrance hall that we've made inside the original structure. We've taken down walls and we've opened up the windows to let the light in to the new entrance hall. But this was all far from straightforward. We had to prop up the facades of the historic museum while keeping it open to the public. and dig a very deep basement and pile 50 meters down. Now, as all of you know, when you make a deep basement, you usually have a huge superstructure on top that prevents the slab from floating, but we didn't, we just had a courtyard. And Cambridge University, who worked closely with Arup, who were the amazing engineers for this project, was so taken with the structural audacity of our scheme that they asked if, purely as a piece of research and at their expense, they could install fiber optic monitoring cables in the tension piles, because they believe that the relative movements that will be recorded may disprove aspects of the elastic theory, which is the theory that the engineers use to calculate this kind of thing. And certainly the data that's coming back is suggesting a different understanding. So without realizing it, but because we kind of pushed it so hard, we may have actually advanced engineering knowledge. In order to enter and descend through the original structure, which was very important to us to make the connection between the old and new, we had to underpin a wing of the museum. And throughout this entire time, the collection remained in place and the museum was open to the public. These columns and beams are literally supporting the weight of history. So when it came to choosing a color, we painted them a color that really signified the gravitas of the engineering. International orange is the color of the first aircraft. They were painted this so that they could be seen against the color of the sky. And it's also the color of the San Francisco Bridge, so it has great engineering heritage. And during the descent, as you go deep into the underground to get to the new gallery, we've manipulated daylight so that you always feel comfortable and you always have a view of where you've come from. And at the bottom of the stairs, there's this kind of magic moment where there's more daylight than there was as you entered into the entrance hall. And it is this that makes you feel comfortable, even though you're in a subterranean gallery. And what you're looking at here is the folded plate structure that spans 40 meters and supports not just the courtyard above, but all of the services and all of the equipment and paraphernalia that goes with a state-of-the-art exhibition space. And we also created the opportunity to let natural light in, though it has to be said, the museum hasn't really taken advantage of this yet. But it's a supremely flexible space, and you can just see here the grey structure of the ceiling and the kind of middle top of the image for the Christian Dior exhibition. But it shows just how immersive a show you can put on. But entering the museum is now an altogether different, more informal experience. We put the cafe in the sun to the right of the image, and we persuaded the V&A to open it outside of museum hours to better connect it to the city. And in the foreground, you can see the oculus, which reveals the folded structure as though it were a museum vitrine, and it gives you views down into the gallery below. And the repurposed screen now opens up a completely new view onto the street. And we wanted to give this courtyard a very special character because there's an inbuilt paradox here, which is that the big event, the gallery, is hidden below ground. And we wanted to find a way of making visible the invisible and reflect the didactic ethos of the V&A. So we took the geometry of the folded plate structure that supports the courtyard and is the ceiling of the gallery, and we flattened it as a two-dimensional surface. And from here, we extracted a visually complex pattern but used only 6 tile types. Taking inspiration from the V&A's mission of marrying arts and crafts with industry, we worked with Tikkelaar, who were the oldest business in the Netherlands, and designed what is actually the world's first porcelain courtyard. We set out to investigate the potential and the limits of porcelain and to recontextualize it in the design of the courtyard tiles. And we looked at glazes from the Chinese Song dynasty of the 10th and 11th century. And it took months of research and working with these amazing artisans to get where we wanted. And eventually we ended up making the porcelain tiles with a slip casting technique. And to produce these tiles where the whiteness of the porcelain, which is so beautiful as a raw material, is offset by the shiny blue glaze in grooves in the tiles. And we were so emboldened with the results that we tried to push it a bit further. And we wanted to extrude the tiles for the cafe roof. But there's a reason that people don't extrude porcelain, and that's because it doesn't work. But the porcelain, really, it's this lightness which brightens the whole courtyard, and it lifts the kind of very earthy colours of the heritage facades. But there's another paradox here, which is having gone to such huge lengths to open up the courtyard to the street, we then had to find a way of closing it at night. And everything we tried felt crude or impractical, whether it was conventional metal gates or glass panels that disappeared into the ground. It wasn't until we saw this survey drawing that we had commissioned of the original stone screen that we had our clue. Because what this drawing does, it maps the outline of the shrapnel damage from World War II. So we found a way of memorializing this with a pattern of perforations in the anodized aluminium of the gates, and the perforations were all at a different angle, so that when you see the gates in their open positions from a certain angle, you're revealing the imprint of the shrapnel damage of the original stone, which has been removed. And the inscription here talks about the enduring values of the V&A during the war. And we've now added to the inscription to tell the story of the new gates and the memorializing of the shrapnel damage. There used to be a royal crest above the central gates, but it wasn't part of our brief to include that. But there was something that Mark Jones, who was the then director of the V&A, said to me that really moved me. And he said that it is important to remind people, and particularly politicians, how this museum came to be. And so with that thought, we found a way to express the crest, the royal crest, but in a very contemporary way through perforations, but this time they were all perpendicular in the central gate. This photograph really speaks of tradition, but the way the public use the courtyard has been transformative. It's changed the way people see the museum and the way the institution sees itself. And just like in Lisbon, it's sometimes the things you don't do that allows the unexpected to happen. And that's why we didn't clutter the courtyard with all the paraphernalia that goes with an entrance, and why we kept it as flat as possible so that the public be able to appropriate the space. and to be able to just let the life of the city into the museum. And although the courtyard is a space owned by the museum, it belongs to the public. And interestingly, since the new entrance opened, visitor numbers at the V&A, and this is pre-pandemic, were up 23% at a time when museum numbers in London were in decline. And it's also attracting new audiences. And I think it really speaks to the value of creating public urban space in a cultural context. The reimagining of Paisley Museum, which we're currently on site with, as another competition we won, is also about creating public space for a community. Paisley's a town in Scotland with a radical political and industrial history. The town was made really rich by the cotton thread in the 19th century, but this industry no longer exists, and it's now a place of considerable social deprivation. But the people of Paisley are resilient and rightly proud of their past, and it is now our task to help with this project tell the stories of the past and express the dreams of a socially prosperous future through this project. It's very rare, very unusual to have a museum on a high street, but it's this physical and metaphysical connection between town and museum that's really driven our thinking. This red line, a fil rouge, if you like, was inspired by the humble cotton thread, and it weaves its way along the high street, leading to the new courtyard and entrance. And in the courtyard, the cylindrical geometry of the new entrance echoes the form of the historic apse and is this kind of pivot between old and new. And inside, we're breathing new life into the historic galleries and making them completely accessible for everyone, which they weren't before. And the new wing is really about creating social spaces in a museum and connections between the new garden that we've designed and the museum. And you can see here the roof light, which actually frames a view of the observatory to make it feel closer and more present and more part of the museum campus. And then a very different campus here at the University of Oxford. Wadham College is a very progressive place. It was founded by a woman, it's where the Royal Society started, and it was the first college to go co-ed and the first to fly the rainbow flag. However, the wider culture and the context of Oxford colleges can be really intimidating to students, and I might add to architects too. But addressing this duality of history and progressiveness is, for me, what this project is all about. And it also speaks, I think, of the importance and generosity of two alumni whose transformative social and educational experiences inspired them to give back. The two buildings here, they're linked, but they're separate. The brightly coloured internal stair is what unites the two buildings. And when you enter, we want the students to feel a really warm sense of welcome in a space that speaks of youth and modernity, but also of coziness and aspiration. And it's the transparency that reveals the life inside the college. Both the buildings pivot around the stone steps, which lead you up to a terrace level to the old library. And the stone you can see here is reflected in the glass elevation. So this connection between old and new is so important. And we used the same honey-coloured Headington stone as on the old library building to make that gentle transition, if you like, from old to new. And we're always mindful of framing views of the contemporary through the heritage buildings. And we worked very hard to create a kind of visual complexity here, that the glass is highly insulated, but it's layered with colored reflective and printed films, which give a kind of richness and really give the illusion of depth. And then the glass surface picks up in a very kind of muted way the reflections of the landscape around. And we used color, but in a very subtle way. But the color is particularly apparent on cloudy days, and it just gives a warmth to the place. And we tried really to find that kind of delicate balance between a welcome familiarity and an aspirational environment, between buildings that are fresh and modern, but they're also respectful of the 400-year-old college. Research is very important to our practice, and over the last 2 years, for sure, there's never been more of a respect for science. And it was nanotechnology that inspired a research project that we embarked on pre-COVID, a collaboration with Sonia Contera, who's on the right, who's the professor of biological physics at Oxford University. And with this project, we are rethinking how to use nature's strategies in trees to grow the materials of the future. So we're extracting the lignin from the wood, leaving just the cellulose structure, which we then infuse with clear bioresins. And what we're aiming to do is take the research out of the lab and to make a new material that is stronger than steel, a better insulator than glass, and that lets the light in. And we've called it transparent wood. I think it's really important that, you know, in times of crisis, which certainly we've all just been through, there's a tendency to retreat into the comfort of what we know. But we've got to resist this, and we've got to continue to dream. And it's really early days, but dreaming is what this project's about. And up to now, we've self-funded this project, but we're committed to finding the funding to take it to the next level, because I think there's some really exciting work to be done here. A Maggie's Care Centre, Cancer Care Centre, for me really goes to the heart of architecture. It's about creating spaces that are uplifting, that are calming, and that will lighten your mood. Now, this was our site in edged in pink for the Maggie's Cancer Care Centre at Southampton Hospital. There was no historic context here, and it was the most unprepossessing of sites because it's just a sea of car park. So our solution was to bring a bit of magic to the place, and we wanted to imagine that there used to be a piece of the New Forest here, which we carved into to make space for the building. And it's a very simple plan, a central space from which all the others radiate, but it's surrounded by nature, as though nature was there first and then the building. And we've used ceramics again by Camella, the same people who made the tiles in Lisbon. And, you know, ceramics is a beautiful material, but it's a material that comes from the earth, and it plays very well with nature. And this ceramic blade wall is what leads you into the center, where we wanted just to create an oasis of calm. And in the central space, the kind of hub, if you like, the soft light from the roof light really marks the center of the space, where cancer patients and their families and their friends can sit together and be with other people who are going through the same kind of experience. And then off this central space, there are the more private spaces, but always with a view of nature. And now with the planting very much more mature than in this picture, you can no longer see the car park. The ceramic walls sometimes become shelves. And in this private space here, they hold a collection of poetry that was selected by the architect, by the artist Edmund de Waal, who I met while we were working on the V&A. And each side of the ceramic blades is a different color. All the colors are always soft, they're muted, and sometimes we just reveal the color of the clay itself. But we used the ceramic structurally to support the roof, and this involved months and months of trial and error. Some of it we did just, ourselves in the yard of our office, because using ceramic structurally, as far as I know, hasn't been done before. And learning from our experience at Lisbon, we knew to give a gloss to the glaze so that it will pick up the different lights and reflect the shadows of the trees. And as much as possible, we want the building to feel as though it's just grown from the landscape, because it's that brings a sense of well-being to people, and that's what this project's about. And we picked colors that correspond with the bark of the trees of the landscape, which was designed by the landscape architect Sarah Price. And we used a rippled surface to the stainless steel cladding to just give a more subtle reading of the landscape and amplify the landscape in the building itself. And it really, it just beautifully captures the rays of the sun. In this final project, I mean, we are literally putting the sun in a box. Our client, the Canadian clean energy company General Fusion, are developing the world's first targeted magnetized fusion facility. Fusion is, as you know, it's the process that powers the sun and the stars, and it has the potential to provide the planet with clean, low-cost, zero-carbon energy forever. But before I show you the project, I want to tell you how it came about, because there's a cute meat story to our relationship with General Fusion. In 2017, I was invited to speak at a conference in Kuala Lumpur on the theme of algorithm versus cerebrum. And to give you an idea of the diversity of the speakers, I was speaking about soul and intuition in architecture, alongside a young Thai astrophysicist who was sending rockets to the moon. And one of the joys for me of this kind of event, and the reason that I agree to them, is because you get to listen to other speakers. So I went to the talk about nuclear fusion, a subject I knew almost nothing about. And I came away so inspired and just believing that the world's energy problems were about to be solved forever. And that evening, over dinner, I sat next to General Fusion's CEO, Chris Murray, and we talked about our hopes for the future. And I asked if he ever came to London, and if he did, would he come and give that same talk? So we swapped cards in the way that you do, and I didn't really expect to hear from him again. But a few months later, he called. He said he was in London. So he came to our office in the warehouse, and he gave a fantastic talk, except for the last slide. The last slide, which he proudly showed, was an artist's impression of what the facility could look like. It was a shed. It projected an image of defensiveness and being completely closed to the world. And I had to call him out on it. I said, you are talking about an innovation so powerful that it will literally transform the world. You've got to message that through the design of the building. And that's what architecture is about. So by way of thanks to Chris for his talk, I said, we signed an NDA. If you give us a high-level brief, I put a small team onto it for a couple of weeks, which turned out to be a few months because we got so overexcited, and we'll show you what it could be. And that's how this project came about. And what we've set out to do is to find a physical way to express the extraordinary power and promise of fusion, and to make fusion palpable, both from inside and outside the building, because we want to inspire the people who work there and to engage the public and to reveal what goes on and to set up a new benign relationship between nature and technology, because by doing that, we can take away the fear. So the architecture of this prototype plant, which is being built in Culham, which is just outside of Oxford in the UK, it needs to capture the technological optimism that fusion is going to solve the problems of the world in energy terms. And as the first facility of its kind to be built in the world, this work needs to be seen. And so we're making it very visible and very transparent. But this is what architects do. You know, we message big ideas through buildings without the need for words. And we're using design to visually soften what is a very hard industrial technology, but it also has a technical purpose, because this outer skin, a very fragile looking ETFE, creates a solar chimney that will naturally cool the fusion island for most of the year. And the exhibition spaces and offices and labs are all arranged radially around the fusion island. You know, the fusion island itself is a concentric circle. So we wanted to express that in the way that the building was arranged and the way that you see the building. And it also means that wherever you are, you can either look, as you hear, to the left and see the science, or you can look to the right and see nature outside. And it's this sort of reciprocity of the relationship between technology and nature, which just, it tells a story in itself. And really, this is just so much more than being a silent container. And I think it's important, you know, this is an industrial piece of infrastructure, but having a concern for nature, biodiversity, sustainability is just as important to do that here as it is in a cultural building or an office building. Although it's less usual to find this kind of sensibility in a piece of industrial infrastructure. And really what we're doing here is using architecture to show a commitment and a belief in the future. And to me, that's really what architecture is all about. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you. A lot of times you look at people's titles of their presentations and you wonder what they're going to speak about, and yours fulfills everything that certainly I had thought you were going to talk about, and why architecture really matters. That was truly inspirational. I'm going to ask people that are online to send in their questions. Kevin Cooper is actually going to take those questions and assemble those questions. And while he does that, so please send in your questions. While he does that, I'm going to ask a few of our NORR global architects to ask you some questions. So I'm going to start with someone from the UK, Russell Baxter, who is the design director for the Glasgow office. Russell, if you want to come online, please.
Hi, Amanda. Firstly, thank you very much for the fascinating talk and insight into your practice. It was great. First question was, you said at the beginning of your talk regarding differentiating ALA from future systems, that all the work begins with a conversation and is research-based and narrative-driven. I think as architects, we're all quite guilty of starting to dive in quite quickly with a design. So at what point do you begin to sketch? When does it go into paper?
Well, as late as possible, because I think it's really, I think the idea of the kind of architect as auteur with the kind of master sketch, I think is a very old-fashioned view of architecture now. It's a deeply collaborative discipline, and that kind of collaboration, it needs time to gel, it needs time to come alive, and you really need to ask yourselves the big questions. Who is this building for? What is the purpose of the building? What's the history of the site? What does the client want to, what are their ambitions? And to, you need to understand not just the question, you need to give time for those answers to formulate, because until you really have that sense of why you're doing it and who you're doing it for, it's best not to make commitment. And sometimes what we do is we diagram things, and we diagram a kind of a process of developing a narrative. And sometimes, I mean, just to give you sort of illustration, at the V&A, this sort of notion of how to make visible the invisible, which was a kind of inbuilt paradox, became, even though it was a very abstract idea, it became the thing that drove the project, both at kind of macro and micro scales. And then with Lisbon, this site was amazing. We could easily have just started sketching immediately, but actually the big problem with that site, which wasn't immediately apparent from the kind of walking along the riverfront, was there was no connection to the rest of the city. And if we hadn't designed that bridge, if we hadn't persuaded our client and the city of Lisbon that needed to happen in order for that museum to be successful, it wouldn't have mattered what we'd have done. People wouldn't have been able to get to it. So, those are not things that come out of sketching. They're things that come out of talking and thinking. And
okay, thank you. And the second one was, you've done or are doing a number of self-generated projects to address the disempowerment of architects. Tin Can, the pop-up restaurant in London, springs to mind, and your pitch, which I think might still be going, not sure. Is this something you're still interested in, or indeed have time for? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's, as architects, we can often be really passive and really reactive, and I think it's important to feel that you've got a bit of kind of agency in the process. So Tin Can, the pop-up restaurant, came about actually because we'd lost so many competitions over a number of years, and it was so, when you lose a competition, it's so debilitating. You have to pick yourself up and get going again. You've put so much into it, and we thought, okay, let's not spend the money doing competition. Let's spend the money just doing something that we think would be fun and that says something about us, being a bit entrepreneurial and having a lot of Spanish and Portuguese architects in the office, knowing a lot about tin fish, and that's how the idea came about. The transparent wood is another self-generated project, and pitch, we're still trying to pitch it to people to give us the funding to build a prototype, but that came about because we have a five-a-side football team in the office, and it's really difficult in London, and I'm sure it's true of other cities around the world, to book space. That all of the pitches are booked months and months in advance. There aren't enough. And we go, okay, there's so many kind of empty sites in the city which are either waiting for planning permission, or the developer's gone bust, or whatever it is, that if we designed a stack of 3 high five-a-side football pitches that could be demountable, that you put, let's say for 6 months while a client is waiting for planning, and you immediately attract a kind of community around that place, because you've got 3 games going at the same time. It's like you don't expect to be playing five-a-side football in the air. It's exciting, but we're still pitching for the funding, or pitching to find a local council who wants to build one.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Amanda, just a follow up on that. How does ALA actually look at projects, and how do you decide which projects on a yearly basis to really concentrate on? Obviously, you do a number of competitions, and there are other, because there's quite a diversity in the number of projects that and the types of projects that you go after. How do you decide on a yearly basis which projects are important to you?
We don't really have a strategy as such, and we don't kind of plan it in advance, but our only kind of litmus test for doing a project or a competition is if we really want to do it. If we're really not, if we think it would keep us ticking over, it would bring in some security financially, but that's it, we don't do it. Now we've suffered commercially as a result of that at times. We've had our kind of ups and downs, but I've always been of the view, if I don't feel motivated by something, how can I expect anybody else to be? And that's become really very much the culture of the office. We don't do things that we are, unless we're profoundly interested in, and they can be at any scale. It can be a piece of master planning, or it can be a tiny pop-up restaurant. The scale is unimportant. It's the purpose behind it.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to ask Tobias Fellows from our Ottawa office, who's a principal there. Tobias, you have a couple of questions?
Thanks, Silvio. Amanda, we'll have to get you over to Canada to design some stacked hockey arenas. I'd just like to thank you for your really great lecture today. The very compelling projects, and the history of your firm is also very interesting. And I'm interested in the diversity of work that your firm is doing, from the most public buildings, museums, which are public spaces, where you're considering visitors' experience, to power plants, which are buildings that are more machine-driven kind of design challenges. And I'm wondering if there's any lessons that you've kind of learned from either of those kind of very disparate typology of architecture that you've applied to either one of them.
Well, it's a really interesting question, and actually the work that we're doing for General Fusion and the whole kind of, what is the experience both for the people who work there, but what's the experience for the visitor, that really came out of our experience of the sort of visitor experience in museums, and the journey and how to put people at ease, how to make people feel comfortable, how to create a sense of well-being. And in the initial brief that we got from General Fusion, they wanted like a visitor center. I said, you don't need a visitor center here. The experience of being in this building, seeing that machine, seeing all the kind of labs that go alongside it, that's the visitor experience. And so we created this kind of public loop of circulation. I mean, obviously there are very secure boundaries beyond which you can't go, but it's that gives you an understanding of what the technology is about, but it also gives you a kind of visceral sense of the promise and the extraordinary endeavor of scientists over more than 50 years to get to this point. I mean, it's the Holy Grail. So it is absolutely true that any project, that it becomes part of your repertoire that you can then draw on in the future. And that's why I'm a great believer that in the competitions that we fail in, or we fail to win, that isn't wasted work. It's never wasted work. Some of the most important ideas actually come out of those competitions that we've lost, because maybe we've pushed it a bit too far for a client, but we can then learn and extract and sort of condense some of that thinking in the next one. So yeah.
Interesting. And just I guess my follow-up question is, I've seen a lot of in Canada, we're doing in the Parliament Hill, we're doing not NORR, but the government is doing a new power plant, and there is this very public function to it. Is there something that is, and I know that Carlos Rada is doing one in the Netherlands, I believe, where he's making these kind of very public spaces for power plants. Is there a connection that is important for people to kind of see how power, like it's always been something that's been removed from us that we haven't seen, but now there seems to be this kind of desire to kind of show that. Is there a connection with where we are in kind of our thinking about energy use and the importance to kind of understand these things?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, first of all, we've never, I mean, unless we sort out the energy problems of the world, we're kind of doomed. So we've got to, it's one of the most, if not the most critical issue of our time. And, the fusion plant that we're working on, it's fusion, not fission. So there isn't the kind of the risk of any nuclear fallout as there is with fission. So, and it's one of the, it's the brilliant kind of conception of this technology that it can be built anywhere safely, in cities, in the most remote parts of the world. But, the word nuclear is always, it feels scary, and you've got to take the fear out of it. And by making the process transparent, by revealing what goes on, by seeing the kind of the sort of links between nature and clean technology, it says so much. So we're hoping when this facility is complete, that school kids will go there, that it won't just be for the scientists and the politicians and the investors, it'll be for the general public.
Thank you for your answers. It's a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias, and thank you, Amanda, for actually standing up for architecture with General Fusion and convincing them to that they needed to bring in architecture to really.
Yeah, but I have to say, I mean, you know, Chris Mary, the CEO, and there are not many people in his position who would have given it a go. I mean, they're an amazing client. And it's it is a wonderful collaboration, because there's the Fusion Island is, you know, that is still being developed as we are designing the building, as we're going to planning. And so there's a complete kind of symbiosis between machine and building, and that's absolutely fascinating.
It is interesting. I'm going to ask Peter Dubin, who is Vice President of our Chicago office, to come online. Peter?
Hi, Amanda. So I have a question about your design process. I've read and I've heard that your studio is essentially structurally different than almost every other design organization I'm aware of, that it has non-hierarchical leadership, and you and the other directors approach each project as a collaborative team. And you referred today to your office as akin to a family home. Whatever you're doing is clearly working. Your projects are rich and layered with expression and meaning. You're balancing the theoretical and the technical, design and production. The work is simply stunning. So with regard to your organization, there's a saying that I have personally never been at all fond of, and that you thoroughly disprove: a camel is a horse designed by a committee. So how do you, with your democratic organization and diversity of ideas, accomplish design? Can you talk a bit about your process and how your designs flourish as a result of the process?
I mean, well, for sure, the richness of the thinking, the richness of the work comes out of the diversity within the office. You know, the leadership team is 50-50 male, female. I have to say that my directors are very much younger than me, from 3 different continents. And that is, you know, that is a very, very important part of the mix. And in a way, you know, the practice came about in such an unusual way. You know, having been Future Systems and then with Jan's death, starting a new office, and yet we had a certain, you know, we had a body of work already and a certain reputation, and then we're kind of becoming something else. And how do you become something else? And it really is, you know, everybody working together. And we're kind of 5 directors now, that everyone works on every project, and we meet every day. We didn't used to, actually, it was really interesting. We didn't used to meet every day together. But over the lockdown, we got into the habit of meeting every day because we weren't physically in the office together. And it's fantastic. And it's meeting sometimes with no agenda. You know, because you're meeting every day, you don't have to plan too much, but it just means that we are all involved in everything. And of course, we don't always agree. And of course, we come at things from different angles. But one thing that I have learned is when we all agree on something, you know it's right. If there is one person who is really doubting and questioning and, you know, making us revisit something, and that could be any one of us, you know something's wrong. And it's almost as though it's a kind of, you know, inbuilt checks and balances. You can't say what's wrong because you all want it to be right. But if we've just learned and we respect each other enough to know we've got to step back and to be unafraid to divert or to, you know, start again, or re-question what we've done. And I think that the other thing that I've learned is, and it's about the sort of if you like, the lack of hierarchy. Of course, there is some hierarchy, you can't avoid that. But the more responsibility you give to people, the less structure you put in place, the more the office is going to look after itself. And once you've got the culture there, and I actually, you know, this is a conversation I had with Richard Rogers a few years ago. Once you get the culture sorted, the architecture looks after itself. And, you know, it takes a long time to do that, and it takes a lot of commitment from everyone to kind of constantly refresh and come up with new ideas, or to question. But I hope that, you know, we have, it's very odd, you know, working in this house, that also came out of conversations we were having across the office over lockdown, you know, over Zoom. And we would sometimes have kind of structured conversations around a theme, and the themes are, you know, how can we work better together? How can we work better for society? You know, some of the really big issues. And I just posed the question, could we imagine a really, you know, working from a different place? Because the warehouses we have are fantastic, but they were usually in a really quite sleazy part of town, and it wasn't so nice to go out at lunchtime. There wasn't, you know, and so it was just a sort of notion. Could we imagine being in a house in a nice part of town where there's, you know, nice little cafes and pubs and restaurants to go to, and out of that conversation, and people responded quite interestingly about, you know, how it could be interesting to have different rooms. You could have a project room, or, you know, and we've now got the technology so that anybody can work anywhere, although people do get incredibly wedded to their places. But, you know, different rooms have slightly different characters, different proportions. It's an old building, some are grand, some are, you know, a bit more cozy. And it just means you can work in a slightly different way. And it was odd for all of us at the beginning. And we thought we were going to lose something special about what we had, which was that we were just in one big shed and everybody could see what everyone else is doing. And, you know, we've got to work really hard to find a different way of that happening. So we're a lot of walking up and down stairs. Always the doors are open unless you're having a private meeting. But I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you, Peter. Obviously, Amanda, you know, to Peter's point, how large is your office right now?
I think we're 35.
Okay. So, and I mean, to Peter's point, it's a very unique office. It's a very different way. I mean, it's certainly different than Richard Rogers' office. And you're doing incredible work. I mean, as far as projects, how many projects would you be working on right now?
I think we're working on about 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible workload. It really is, and they're probably internationally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are some projects that I'm not allowed to show, so I haven't, you know, been able to talk about them, but I will be.
We'll be able to see them next year.
Yeah. By the way, I've never been to Canada, so, you know, when things are kind of more back to normal, I'd love to be invited.
Well,
I'm sure my client, General Fusion, will invite us. But...
Well, we'll invite you.
Okay.
So we'd like to go to Philadelphia with John Koulis, who is our principal there. John, would you like to come on with a few questions, please?
Hey, Amanda, and thanks again. It's an amazing talk. I would love to come visit that office and wear my best socks. I have sort of a question about the beginning and later on in the process. I I was listening to your GSD talk from some time ago, and I think at the time you had probably closer to some of the competitions that you had lost. Were sort of expressing some real frustration with competition as a methodology. I'd like to hear you talk about the sort of difference between that process of starting a conversation with a client as a commissioned architect versus a having to develop an idea in a different kind of relationship in the context of a competition where your idea is maybe more idiosyncratic. And as you say, maybe pushed it too far for the client. It sounds like there's an advantage to both in a way in the development of your way of being as an architect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a very different way of working because competitions are completely artificial. You're working by yourself without the client for, let's say, 3 months on what could be an incredibly complex scheme. And so you get no feedback. And it's very much dependent on the kind of the smartness of the brief and how much latitude they give you. But what I really value about a competition, as opposed to getting a commission, which is of course lovely, but what is different about a competition is you have this incredibly intense period of work. I mean, it's so intense, and you're not distracted by any of the day-to-day logistical client consultant stuff that goes on. You just are focused on trying to find that idea that's going to unlock the potential of something. And you kind of, you have the freedom to do a huge amount of thinking up front, and then a kind of mad dash at the end, or it just depends how quickly you come up with that, with understanding really what it is going to drive the design forward. But I mean, I think that that once you've won a competition, you then kind of start over again. I mean, you can't ever expect that you've won the competition, right? Off you go into the sunset and you build it. I mean, it's there's a massive period of time and just a readjustment that you have to make, and you have to get to know the client, and I can't kind of underplay the importance of the client-architect relationship, how important it is to like each other, how important it is to respect each other. And I think because because of the way we are, I think in a way our clients are they're sort of self-selecting. We've never really worked for a developer. I mean, we've a little bit tried, and it's not ever worked. And you could say, well, that's that's a little bit irresponsible commercially, but I'm not saying we could never work with a developer, but they've never really sought us out, and if they do seek us out, they kind of tend to step back sometimes, and I don't know why, because we're extremely responsible. We take budgets extremely seriously, where we deliver on time. We can do really very, very complex engineering. We're technically very fluent, but I think we've both kind of self-selected, so I think that says something. But it is so important to work closely with your client, and because we all know stuff goes wrong. I mean, there isn't a single project where stuff hasn't gone wrong, and you've got to be able to weather the storm together, and to be able to have hard conversations, to be asked difficult questions, and to ask those questions back. And I think once you have that, once you've established that rapport and that there's no fear about that, you're not going to be judged harshly by asking the harsh question, then it's better for the project.
Your work, it pushes the edges of lots of things on the construction side. That you can answer is in together architects and engineers trying to figure it out. And it does look like there's. I'm interested in how construction interweaves with your design process. Do they overlap at times? How do you work with the people that are constructing your buildings? I was looking at the gates, the beautiful gates, and imagine maybe that happened later. I don't, when does design stop and construction begin, and how overlapped are they?
Well, I think it's a really good question, because there shouldn't be this kind of hard cutoff point. And we love working with makers, because makers have a knowledge of their techniques or their materials that has come out of, often generations of knowledge that is passed down from one person to another. And we want to have some of that kind of magic dust rub off on us. And that can only happen if we're working really, really closely with them. And I mean, working with the, whether it was Camella for the tiles on Lisbon or Tekela for the tiles at the V&A, we could not have done what we did unless, and we expect an awful lot of our partners. We're very demanding, but we expect them to demand of us. And we couldn't have done it without their kind of buy-in to the value of trying to push the limit, or trying to understand the limits of something, and the value that we'll all come out a little bit changed from the process. We'll all have learned something, and that's exciting, and that's what drives us. And I think it's, we've got to be able to communicate that passion and to receive it back, and for it to be reciprocal. And there was a lovely story actually on the gates of the V&A, because we had to design this piece of software to calculate the different, and I'm like completely useless at this, so I can't really even explain it very well, but the different angles of the perforation, so that you could get this very specific reading of a imprint of a piece of shrapnel damage. And the people who made the gates got really, really, they totally understood the attention to detail, the kind of polishing of the inside of every hole. And then on the edge of the gates, we wanted to put this red anodized aluminium strip, just a tiny little flash of color that would just, bring a bit of sparkle. And the makers that came and said, okay, we're gonna, no, they produced the prototype, and he had made a red anodized aluminium screw, so that there wouldn't, we didn't ask him to do that. And of course you have to do that. But,
yeah.
And that was just a lovely example of someone just going that extra mile because they were so proud of what they were doing.
Thank you.
Amanda, can you talk a little bit about, you said research is really important to your office and to you, and I, we've had a number of architects from Europe and ones from North America, and there's a real distinct difference between European architects and North American architects. The research level is far higher. We're, and we're looking at, Renzo Piano's office and the amount of research that they do on a project. We're working with them right now, compared to what happens in North America. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is and what percentage of a project you actually spend doing research? I mean, the two projects that you talked about, both the V&A and the MAT, and the amount of research that went into those two projects, because those materials that didn't come off the shelf, they didn't come out of a catalog, and there was an incredible amount of both research, technical research that, did you do it all in your office? Did you have design assist on those, or was it done, during construction? Can you talk a little bit about that research and how you actually do that and how it fits into your overall approach? I mean,
it is very, it's very important to us that in what, at whatever scale, and it can be a tiny little thing, that in each thing we do, we try and advance the debate a bit, or to test the limits of something. And, it's sometimes quite difficult to do that within the constraints of a project. And I will just use as an illustration the V&A, because, the V&A is a publicly funded institution that needs to rightly account for every pound that they spend and to be seen to be getting value for money. And when we started the work on the tiles for the courtyard, we hadn't set out to design it in porcelain. We really hadn't thought that far down the line. All we knew is we wanted the courtyard to have some color, to speak of the kind of richness of the ceramics collection in the museum. But we were extremely fortunate because the program was divided into two phases. The first phase was to take down the stone screen, the Aston Webb screen, stone by stone, so that the pieces that were not being put back could be preserved for posterity. And that had to be because the entire screen had to come down in order that all the machinery could come in through that side of the building. And that gave us the latitude to explore. I mean, we thought that the ceramic research would just take a month or two. It didn't. A lot of the people that we approached were not interested in doing anything beyond what they knew. They just wanted to roll out the same stuff. Some people we approached attempted to do things, but they were just crude and, it wasn't going anywhere. It took us a long time to find Ticola, to understand that porcelain is a very different material. But as the kind of month of research became 6 months of research, our client, the V&A, understandably felt a little bit nervous. And but we had the time because of the nature of the phased program, but they wanted to know, they wanted us to have a plan B in the event that the research didn't work out. And of course, the very nature of research is that sometimes it doesn't work. Otherwise it wouldn't be research. And they wanted an alternative scheme. And we were working so hard, and it was taking so much time and resource to explore this. Entirely done at our cost. It was our choice to do it. We weren't asked to do it. And I said, okay, their plan B, we'll just have Portland stone, and it will be in a grid. I'm not even going to draw it because anyone can do it, and it will be super quick. And that there was enough comfort for them, but they were a great client, and it's hard to imagine a developer, let's say, allowing you that time to explore, or even it being built into the the program. So it's, you have to have, you know, a client has to understand that and be part of the journey, you know, some kind of risks are noble and worth taking. And I think it's interesting that you talk about kind of the North American condition, because I'm very, very conscious of that. And it's, you know, it has to partly be, and I mean, it's kind of happening a bit here, but the construction industry in North America is so litigious. It's set up in such a way that it's, I imagine, very frightening for people to, whether architects, engineers, or clients, to embark on research in the same way. You know, it's more, maybe it's just more part of our culture, or maybe it's just we haven't caught up with the litigious nature.
Yeah, I think it's opening up a little bit with design assist, and that's starting to be understood a little bit more, where you do go out and you do kind of a design build on some of these things, but it's difficult.
But I think the other thing is that, you know, what's interesting now is there's so much shared knowledge, and that's why I really commend you for what you're doing. It's so important that we all share with each other so that we can all learn from each other. You know, there's no need to relearn everything every time if somebody's already done it. And I think people are generally very generous with their, you know, with their experience and with their knowledge. And I think, you know, it falls to all of us to be generous with our time, whether it's with students or, you know, other architects. Obviously, you know, we're in a very competitive profession, but the nature of a lot of our collaboration is with people from different disciplines, where, you know, there's not so much, there's not that same kind of competitive edge, and that is, you know, that is incredibly important. The, you know, the engineering and the people that we work with, you know, the engineers that we work with are individuals who, some of whom I've been working with since I was at Richard Rogers. So we have very, very deep relationships that go back, you know, 30 years, that allow us to push each other and to be critical of each other, as well as being really supportive. And that's very important.
I agree. Totally agree. I'm going to move on to Kevin Cooper, who has been assembling some questions from the audience out there. So Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks again. It's a really, really inspiring talk. There's been lots and lots of comments to that effect, just saying that, you know, people really enjoyed it. A lot of questions about clients, which is interesting. There's maybe two questions that stick out, perhaps one about an older project and one about a newer one. And the first one about the older project, the press centre at Lord's, there's people interested in, you know, how did you persuade, I guess, what presumably was a very sort of traditional client body to embrace, you know, that kind of project at that time, because it's 25 years ago now, isn't it? Getting on for that. So what was the dynamic with that particular client? I bet it was quite interesting.
Well, that it was indeed, it was a dynamic, and there was a very a sort of equally kind of cute meet story with them, because it was a competition. We were for sure the outsiders. At the time, the office was literally just me and Jan. You know, it was, I don't think they knew. If they had done, they would have been a bit freaked out. And maybe we had a certain kind of naivety, but, you know, because of the sort of nature of the building being pure McLuhan, and we kind of got that really early on, and then this idea of the building a giant lens looking down, the only way we could do it was with boat builders. And we went, Jan and I, to a boat show in Earl's Court, which is an annual show in London. And we had these drawings of the media centre, and we'd kind of queue up to speak to the boat builders, and most of them literally would shoo us away because they wanted to speak with rich clients who were about to commission a yacht, not with two architects with a few sketches in their hand. And then we came across Pendennis, and in particular the Henk Viekens, who's one of the founders of the boat builders. And he did a calculation on the spot, and he said, this is how much aluminium you'll need, and this is roughly what it'll cost, and I can do it. So we went into the competition with a kind of a real confidence that we'd found somebody who was committed. I mean, we'd only found the one, I have to say. 10 had turned us down. And then when we went to make the presentation to the committee, the MCC, and the MCC, the Marylebone Cricket Club, as they're called, is literally kind of bastion of the sort of English establishment. I mean, you couldn't get more establishment than that. And Jan and I turned up, and it was raining. I remember it so well. I know we turned up at the Pavilion building, which is immediately opposite the media centre, and the very sort of historic long room, and it's a very important place. And the steward came out of the door and he said, have you come to sell something? And I said, well, yeah, in a manner of speaking, we have. And he said, well, I'm afraid you can't come in because you're a woman and women aren't allowed in this building, and he can't come in because he's not wearing a tie. So that was, you know, that was our kind of our pre-entry to presenting this competition. So, I mean, for many people, I think that would destabilize them. But it was so absurd that it just made us more confident. We thought we literally have nothing to lose. And we went in supremely confident. And we won. And it is a great credit to them that they picked us. But the irony is that having found the boat builder, and we'd organized, you know, further down the line after we'd won the competition, we were developing the design, we'd organized for the committee to come have a meeting on site in Cornwall with Pendennis, so that they could see and have confidence that this building could be made by boat builders. And they were very impressed, but someone in the kind of project management realm, but no, you can't do this. You can't just negotiate with one construction company. You've got to go to tender. And he said, oh, come on. You know, we're going to be honest here. There's not a million people who can do this. These guys can do it. They're committed to do it. And if we work with them from day one, it's going to make it so much easier, more seamless. We'll save time, we'll save money. No, we had to go to tender. So we then spent a farcical kind of 2 months or maybe 3 trying to find other people who would do it. People who say, oh, we can do it, but it'll be in facets. And we lost 3 to 4 months of this process. Well, it came to nothing. And of course, during that time, Pendennis got so fed up. What happens? They put the price up. So they did end up building it, and they got paid a lot more money for it because the MCC didn't quite have the confidence to just go with them. And I think that's another, you know, the whole sort of tendering process of architecture. If you know who you want to build it, and you have, even if you have a relationship with them because you've done work with them before and you know how they work and you respect each other, why can't you just negotiate a price? Why do you have to go through this can't the quantity surveyor say, this is what we believe is a fair price, negotiate the price with the contractor, boom, save all that time. But it's just not how it works.
No, it's interesting. It does demonstrate as well the importance of a good client. I think that's certainly our experience, that the best projects usually have the best clients. It's not a coincidence. One of the other questions was in relation to the Paisley Project, which is obviously near Glasgow. For those of you who don't know, Paisley is, it's amazing, isn't it? It's got some wonderful Victorian buildings in it. It really does. It's fantastic. You mentioned, the brief was quite sort of radical, and again, in our experience, when you have a more interesting client with a more radical brief, it usually leads to a more interesting solution. So, what was radical about the brief for Paisley that in particular sort of attracted you to it?
I think what they'd already started to do was quite extraordinary, because they knew that they were going to do this project. They knew that the museum was not, it wasn't kind of fit for purpose anymore, because there were too many steps. The accessibility was, and it was in very poor condition. So they'd started to move things out. So they took the library collection and they put it in a vacant shop just further down the high street. And they did that with the storage as well. And I thought that, that is brilliant. That is because the high street that the museum is on, that there's a terrible shopping centre there, and I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, so that kind of creams off all the shoppers, and all of these shops are empty. And it was such a brilliant move. And I thought, that they can do that. They know that this has got to be something special, because it's a very eclectic collection. It's not a kind of conventional museum collection. And it needs to go beyond being so much more than just a museum. It needs to, create a sense of renewed pride in the town. And as you said, there are so many beautiful listed buildings. In fact, there are more listed buildings in Paisley than anywhere else in Scotland except for Edinburgh. And Paisley's not even a city, it's a town. And because of its industrial past and the philanthropy of people giving money to build schools and museums and libraries, it's got this fantastic wealth of buildings.
Oh, sorry, the Coates Memorial Church might be one of the very best churches in all of Scotland.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And our client is Renfrewshire Council. I mean, you don't expect a council to be radical. And the other thing that was very interesting and the first thing I said when we presented the competition was, literally, this is the most radical brief we've ever had, and thank you, because it just plays to our strengths. But they had made, Renfrewshire had made or Paisley had made a bid for City of Culture, and they lost it to Dundee. I think they lost it to Dundee, or they lost it, anyway, they lost it to someone. But they'd done a huge amount of work in order to kind of create the narrative for why Paisley should be the City of Culture. And we were able to use that work to kind of generate a narrative for the project. And it's just a really, I think they're a kind of case study in being an exemplar of excellence for a council who expect the best, who want the best, and are very ambitious. And I remember very well going with Matt Wilkinson, who's one of our directors to present the competition, and it was 3 or 4 years ago, and there was this terrible storm. It was like one of these, you know, red danger to death kind of moments on the weather forecast, and people in London were ringing me and saying, you've got to come back. Anyway, we were in Paisley, so we'd ordered a cab to go from the hotel. We were staying in Glasgow, and we'd ordered a cab to go from Glasgow to Paisley, and all the cabs were, they just disappeared because it was snowing so much. So I went out. I thought, we haven't come all this way to get trapped by the snow in Scotland, and we flagged down someone and we bribed them with quite a lot of money just to take us to drive us to Paisley. And it was treacherous driving conditions. But I think they were quite impressed that we'd made it, because a lot of the other teams didn't even make it up there. So yeah, they are a really great client.
No, it's good. And just for your interest, actually, we do work with a lot of councils, and they do vary tremendously, but there are some really terrific people and some very radical people in some of the councils in Scotland, particularly in relation to education projects. You know, it's so terrific to meet some inspiring people. It really makes a big difference. A couple of other questions here. There's a lot, there's a lot of, thought and craft, in what you do. But, you touched on that when you were at that, where you met the Canadian CEO, and, soul and intuition, and I think the intuitive sort of process, there's a lot of good design just comes from that sort of intuitive thought, doesn't it? And it might well be based on loads of collaboration and so on. But one of our colleagues is asking, could you just tell us a little bit more about soul and intuition and just how you sort of follow that thread, I guess? Yeah.
Well, one of the examples I gave in the talk I was giving in Kuala Lumpur at this project, this conference, was and I was using this as an example of how this could never happen in a kind of AI focused world, or AI focused kind of approach, about the Crackle Glaze, and that was the result of an accident in a kiln. Now, if that were now, let's say, the AI program was designed to eliminate anything that wasn't perfect, that would never have been, nobody would have, it took an individual to look at something that had failed and was an imperfection to realize that actually that imperfection was giving something beyond what they had seen before in glazing. And so that, that as one example. And another example I gave was, when we do a project, I often kind of weed around a subject, not just the sort of history, but we were working on a music center, and I read this book about the rebuilding of the Fenice Opera House in Venice, and because I just wanted to kind of get into the groove of music and buildings. And in this book, it told a beautiful story of one of the workmen who'd gone in to salvage what could be salvaged from the fire, had picked up an ornate carving of an angel, in a wooden carving of an angel, which would have been on one of the edges of the boxes of the balcony. And he picked it up and he said, this wasn't just decoration. This was there so that no one in that hall would ever feel alone. And I thought, whoa, that is so powerful. That, you know, and it's that kind of, these kind of, you just kind of come across these things. And if you can, from that notion, even though that was quite sort of literal, if you can then take that notion and turn it into something a bit more abstract, but hold on to that feeling, you know, and to give a building or a space or a, you know, the inside of an opera house feeling through the way that you think. And I hope that, you know, we've achieved a little bit of that in the Maggie's Cancer Centre, that, you know, the way that we use ceramics there, and the trial and error that we did literally in our office to figure out how to, if you could use it structurally, but that sort of care and attention to a material, that somehow that will come through and that people will feel it. And I'm a great believer that if you've really worked something, if you've really given it all of your attention, all of your care, that I think people do feel it, and it's quite intangible. But you know, we don't often talk about feelings in architecture, do we? But I do think it's important.
No, very, very much so. Well, we're almost done, Sylvia. We've got about 5 minutes left, I think. There's maybe one final question here. I think I know the answer to this, but someone's asked, how important is perseverance in your process? I imagine it's extremely important.
I mean, I would say that the quality that is most important for an architect is to persevere and be incredibly resilient. You know, nothing is linear in architecture. Everything is difficult. Working with a cast of thousands, which is the nature of any building project, is really hard. Things go wrong, people make mistakes, and you've got to have an absolute belief in the purpose of the sort of the bigger purpose in what you're doing, and for that to kind of take you through the really bumpy times. And there will always be bumpy times, and you will always be criticized, but you have to learn to take it with humility. And you know, we all make mistakes, and if we're wrong, we have to accept that and divert and change course. And but that's life, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Kind of makes it fun as well, sort of. Yeah. Sylvia, over to you. I think we've just got a couple of minutes to wrap up. Yeah?
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to everyone that's on the line globally for those questions coming in. And Amanda, I want to sincerely thank you on behalf of NORR. As we said at the beginning, this is about teach, learn, and improve. And I sincerely want to thank you for being open with us. I think a lot of times we have lectures that are about people's projects, and they're great, and we learn a little bit about projects. But today, I think that you've really given us an incredible insight into who you are as an architect, and your past, and what you've accomplished in your projects. And I certainly have, you know, I'm in awe of what you've done and what you're continuing to do, and the office that you've built. It's as we've heard, it's a different model, but it's a model that is doing some incredible inspirational work internationally. And I hope that at some point in time in the near future, that we'll be able to work with you in Canada, and hopefully you'll be able to travel to Canada and work with us. So once again, thank you very much for this NORR Ed, and all of the very best. And to everybody that's on the line, thank you for joining us today.
Well,
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you.